Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. We got a pretty rough episode today. I'm sorry to say, the country is not in a good place. Hopefully tomorrow will bring some bright spots. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park, Shaman, and Nathan Stankowski, as well as all our other patrons. You keep us all informed and engaged. If anyone out there wants to join these advocates of humanity first and independent journalism, head on over to patreon.com/YangDaily. It would only take a couple of bucks a month from each listener to keep this podcast and community going and growing into the future. On to the insurrection update. Jacob Anthony Chansley, the bare-chested guy with the horned hat, Adam Johnson, the guy who stole Pelosi's podium, and Derrick Evans, the GOP legislator who joined the riot, have all been arrested on charges of trespassing, violent entry, and disorderly conduct. Evans has resigned his seat following his arrest, thank goodness. At least 176 members of the House have now co-sponsored articles for impeachment. Impeachment would mean that Trump is disbarred from all government service, including another presidential run, as well as the loss of lifetime benefits of a president, including a $200,000 pension, $1 million per year travel allowance, a Secret Service detail, and burial rights at Arlington Cemetery, as well as similar benefits for his family members. It's unlikely that both chambers will reach the required two-thirds majority to enact consequences on Trump, sadly, but even if impeachment did not succeed, there is value in knowing who would vote against it following recent events. As for the public, a Reuters Ipsos poll found that 57% of Americans want Trump out of office, either through impeachment, the 25th Amendment, or resignation. A YouGov poll similarly found 50% want Trump out as soon as possible. Senator Toomey publicly stated that he believes the president committed impeachable offenses. Toomey joins Murkowski, Kinzinger, and several other GOP legislators in saying so. Ted Lieu claims that several GOP lawmakers have committed confidentially that they would vote to impeach. GOP legislators blocked the House attempt at unanimous consent, wielding the argument that impeachment would be too divisive. I think Windsor Mann on Twitter put it well in saying, quote, "First the Republicans said you couldn't impeach before the election, now they're saying you can't impeach after the election, and some say you can't have elections," end quote. In a surprising move, Forbes has taken a hard stance against Trump's lies, after the fact. In an article titled Truth Reckoning, Why We're Holding Those Who Lied for Trump Accountable, Forbes had this to say, quote, "Reinvigorating democracy requires a reckoning, a truth reckoning, starting with the people, paid by the people to inform the people. From day one at the Trump White House, up has been down, yes has been no, failure has been success. Sean Spicer set the tone with the inauguration crowd size, the worst kind of whopper, as it demanded that people disbelieve their own eyes. We need to return to a standard of truth when it comes to how the government communicates with the governed. The easiest way to do that is to create repercussions for those who do not follow the civic norms. Trump's lawyers lie gleefully to the press and public, but those lies magically almost never made it into legal briefings and arguments. Contempt, perjury, and disbarment keep the professional standards high. So what's the parallel in dark arts of communication? Simple. Don't let the chronic liars cash in on their dishonesty. Let it be known to the business world, hire any of Trump's fellow fabulists above, and Forbes will assume that everything your company or firm talks about is a lie. We are going to scrutinize, double-check, investigate with the same skepticism that we would approach a Trump tweet. As Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously said, in a thriving democracy, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but not their own facts." End quote. Lest you hope that the GOP have turned a new leaf, I present to you the Republican National Convention, where GOP leaders heaped praise on Trump just days after he incited a violent mob to storm the Capitol with intent to intimidate or harm our elected representatives. Sporting a Trump-emblazoned vest, Nevada committeewoman Michelle Fiore said, quote, "I surely embrace President Trump and that he is absolutely a positive force in the party. This despite that Republicans have lost 2 Senate races and the governorship in Nevada since 2016, and despite Trump being the first president since Hoover to lose the White House, House of Representatives, and Senate in a single term." Alabama committeeman Paul Reynolds said, quote, "We're a different party because of the people that came with him, and they make us a better party," end quote. I would love to see him go into states that have some House seats we can flip in 22, said Alabama GOP Chair Terry Lathan. She also flatly denied Trump had any role in the attack on the Capitol. The RNC governing board unanimously re-elected McDaniel, Trump's hand-picked chair, and her co-chair, Tommy Hicks, a friend of Trump's son. Arkansas Committeewoman Rita Hamilton said Trump should play a leading part in the GOP in the future. No one challenged Trump's seditious election fraud conspiracies, which he, of course, repeated again. Maryland Committeeman David Bossie summed up the cult mentality with, quote, "You don't have to throw out everybody when there's nothing fundamentally wrong," end quote. Mississippi Committeeman Henry Barber was one of the few to dissent from the groupthink. He said, "We're whistling past the graveyard," and had previously described Trump's conduct before the riot as totally unacceptable. When Missouri National Committeeman Gordon Kinn said at the breakfast that he supports the president, but was disturbed by Trump's comments about the violence at the Capitol, he received a decidedly frosty response. New Jersey's committeeman had the spine to go further, publicly stating, quote, "This room, they're in denial, and that's on the record," end quote. Asked if Trump was still the effective leader of the GOP, Wyoming Republican Chair Frank Ethorn said, "The way Wyoming sees it, yes." In addition, a YouGov poll of 1,500 registered voters conducted just after the Capitol riot, which constituted a violent attack on our elected officials to overturn a free and fair election, revealed a disgustingly high 45% of Republicans surveyed supported the actions of the rioters. Further, 52% of Republicans polled say Biden, I repeat, Biden, is to blame for the riots that Trump directly incited by convincing those people of the lie that the election was stolen, then via a rally where he whipped them to a frenzy against Congress and sicked them on the Capitol. What in the hell, Republicans? I'm sorry to say that it appears the GOP will be the cult of Trump for the foreseeable future. All right, so clearly to calm us down a bit, we should talk about Parler, which seems like a likely next home for Trump. Parler is a social media application and website that is pretty objectively inferior in function to the larger competition, but right-wing radicals who were kicked off of other services for promoting violence and hate branded Parler as the right-wing form of free speech. And by free speech, they mean hate speech and explicit calls for violence and treason. Here are some examples of Parler content that was not removed. Referring to the Capitol riot, quote, "We went 25% of the way, half measures get us nowhere. In order to secure freedom, violence is necessary," end quote. Quote, "Remember, all journalists are soft targets and are fair game in the coming revolution. Don't be afraid to take reporters down by any means necessary," end quote. Accompanying a picture of congresspeople hiding in lockdown in the Capitol with the caption, "Violence works, make them afraid," quote, "How about make them hang? Hashtag death to traitors," end quote. Quote, "We need to start systematically assassinating liberal leaders, liberal activists, BLM leaders, and supporters, members of the NBA, NFA, MLB, NHL, mainstream media anchors and correspondents, and Antifa. Hashtag Civil War II," end quote. These are the sort of explicit calls for political violence that Parler allows to breed on their platform. You can imagine why many are concerned that Trump being kicked off services that do regulate hate speech might lead to even worse results if he brings his cult to something like Parler, where they will have an even more insulated echo chamber of treason. I guess we'll find out. However, the news from yesterday is that Parler has received the same backlash from the tech industry as Trump. Google and Apple both booted Parler from their app stores for violent content. And Amazon Web Services, Parler's web host, has gone one further and booted the site off the internet altogether, citing ubiquitous examples of death threats, celebration of violence, and plots of insurrection, and saying it's clear that Parler does not have an effective process to comply with the AWS terms of service. Some of those quotes above came from Amazon's examples. They will have to find a different web host, and I wouldn't be surprised if only Russian services will take them. Parler's CEO, in response, gave his typically nutty tantrum about free speech and the tech giants conspiring against him, and optimistically estimated that they would be back online in a week. But the funniest part was when he claimed it was due to the service being too successful too fast, and said that there are tons of hosts competing for their business. I haven't laughed like that in a while. Unfortunately, the reaction of Parler's users was also typical, consisting of many threats of violence against Amazon. Again, I feel the need to emphasize that this abhorrent trash has been freely circulating on Parler's service for years, and these companies only now decided to do anything about it. As always, they allowed the tumor to grow to the point where excising it will be nearly impossible. At the moment, with Parler down, Trump has been, ironically, relegated to TikTok, pretty much the only app that has not yet blocked him. Though we may see other services eventually lift their blocks on Trump, as only Twitter's has been announced as permanent. Moving on to the economy, according to CNN, the vast majority of job losses in December were from women, and mostly minority women. Many of them had to quit to do unpaid care work at home. With a UBI, this would simply be losing a job. Without UBI, it is a catastrophe that will trap some in poverty if they weren't already there. And I hate to end it here, but I need to cut it and start on the next episode. I always try to end episodes with some good news and actionable item that you can take to help make the world a better place, because that's what this podcast is about. I gotta level with you, for today's episode, there just wasn't really any good news, and the GOP has me too bummed to seek some out. So, I'm sorry, I'll do better tomorrow. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Give some positive feedback to Murkowski, Kinzinger, and Toomey for admitting Trump's wrongdoing, as well as Forbes for their stance. Let your senators know if you want Trump out. Flood Congress with calls, tweets, faxes, and letters using the Resist bot or Income Movement Easy Contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, United Way, or the H3 podcast thread. And don't forget to Yang Daily.